Hello AuthorTube, it's your friendly neighborhood author, Brandon Adams, and I'm back again with another video. And I'm also back with, get a good look, full beard action. That's right ladies, it's beard season.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so before I get into the video, you guys need to stop. If you haven't watched my previous video, go check it out. I actually revealed the title of my book and the title of the series, the book that I'm currently working on getting published right now. So if you haven't watched that video, please go take a look at it and then come back. I'll wait for you. We'll all wait for you to catch up. So go on and watch it. It's not too long.
A few moments later.
Come on. Oh, you're back. Don't mind me. Just playing some Smash. Oh, you done watching the video? Oh, okay. Oh, alright. Hold on, let me finish this game real quick. Just one sec. Okay, now that you're back, we could go ahead and begin. So, in this video, I'm actually doing a little bit of a different format. And I want to ask you guys, who do you think is the most important character in a story? Before you come to a conclusion, I'm actually going to answer that question in this video, or at least who I think is the most important character in the story when I'm writing a story. Now, be warned, this is strictly my opinion, so it may differ from yours. So I'm gonna go out and say my opinion on the most important character more so applies to fiction and sci-fi more than anything. But you'll be surprised who I think is the most important character. So typically when I ask people this question, their first response is, well, obviously, the protagonist is the most important character, like, duh. And they would have a point. The story follows the protagonist and it follows their quest and their journey. Protagonists such as Ariel from The Little Mermaid, Peter Parker from Spider-Man, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, all great protagonists. And funny enough, they're all Disney characters when I think about it now. This video is not sponsored by Disney. But if Mickey wants to cut some of that cheddar, then hey, I'm willing to get down with the House of the Mouse. Now, protagonist really doesn't need any introduction at all. The protagonist is the hero or the main focus of the story. So the whole story typically revolves around the protagonist. So you would think that's the most important character. And do I feel that way? No. I don't think the protagonist is the most important character. I think the protagonist could possibly be the most interesting, but most important in my eyes, no. I know it sounds weird and I could hear people raising their pitchforks in anger, but hear me out on this one. I'll explain why. So typically where there's a protagonist in the story, there's an antagonist following behind, not too far off. And the antagonist is not necessarily the villain, it typically is, but the antagonist is just someone or something that opposes the hero's or protagonist's main ideals. And some examples of protagonists are the Night King from Game of Thrones, which I was so disappointed they didn't go into more detail about personally, but that I don't feel like ranting, so let's just move on. Darth Vader from Star Wars, of course, probably one of the most popular antagonists out there. And of course, the Joker from the Batman series. If there's ever been a good example of an antagonist, it is the Joker. He is 100% the opposite of Batman and always trying to go against him, a true anarchist. Now with the antagonist, as I mentioned, they're not necessarily bad. An antagonist doesn't have to be a bad guy or a villain. It's just typically how stories are written. The protagonist is a hero, so the yin to that yang would be a villain, and the antagonist kind of falls into that role. But do I think the antagonist is the most important character? No. I think an antagonist is very interesting. I think a story written from an antagonist's point of view is really cool, but I don't feel it's the most important character. I put them on the same level as a protagonist, but most important, no. So let's move on. Okay, so with the protagonist and antagonist characters out of the running, who do I think is the most important character? Is it the dynamic character? And for those of you who aren't aware, a dynamic character is just a character who changes over time. So some examples of dynamic characters would be Thor from the Marvel movies. Look how he changes from Thor 1 and Thor 2, which are pretty much trash, to Thor Ragnarok and the Avengers films. And another example of that, since we're talking about Marvel, is Tony Stark. In the Marvel films, he starts off as someone who's very boastful, very cocky, very arrogant, the rich money man to throw his money about, flashy rich guy. And then he turns into someone who becomes very endearing and caring. But I think one of the best examples of a dynamic character would be none other than Walter White from Breaking Bad.
Goddamn right.
Walter is personally one of my favorite characters. One of my favorite characters in the story. He goes from a very, I don't want to say timid, but he goes from a simple school teacher to this big time, spoiler alert, kingpin drug dealer. And it's so interesting, and for me that is the biggest hook of that series, is just watching Walter grow from this small town man into something big. And it's not, he never started off as a big action star or hero. He just was himself, but he adjusted over time, and you could watch his descent into villainy, I guess, if you could say it. A lot of people hate him. I thought he was a great guy, but hey, he'll still always be Hal in my book. So then that poses a question: do I feel a dynamic character is the most important character in a story? And my answer is no, I don't think they are. Me personally, in my writing, I treat all my characters as dynamic characters because I am big on character development. I look at each character as a real life person, and no one stays the same way 24/7. There's a lot of things to affect us as people, and I feel that should be reflected in my writing and with my characters. So that's one reason I treat all characters that's why I treat all my characters like dynamic characters, because no matter what, something is going to affect them, change them, whatever the situation may be. Okay, so quick recap. If I don't think the protagonist, the antagonist, or dynamic characters are the most important, you may be asking, well, who do I think? Is it the stock/support characters? So a stock character is pretty much your stereotypical character. It's the character that needs no explanation. It's just implied. It's been done to death. You already know. These are all stereotypical characters, and by far the most common and the worst, in my opinion, is the fabled damsel in distress. There's always a weak female who gets kidnapped, captured, and then she's forced to sit there and wait for the big strong man to come and save her. It's something that's done to death, and it really should change. So I guess it goes without saying that when it comes to stock or support characters, I don't think they're the most important. So enough teasing. Who do I feel is the most important character in a story? In my opinion, it's the world itself. Now, I know most people would say, well, that's just world building, but once again, this is my personal opinion, and I treat my world as an actual character, because the world is always changing, and the events in the world affects everything. And this is why I said this mainly applies to sci-fi and fantasy. Because if you're creating something of fiction, something that doesn't exist already, then you have to put that much more time into it. If I was to write a murder mystery story and I said it was in present day New York, then it's kind of self-explanatory. There's not much that I need to go into depth with. But compared to if I was to write Star Wars, speaking of Star Wars, one of the biggest draws, besides the lightsabers, is the world itself. Think about how much lore the world of Star Wars have. Think about all the intrigue, all the different races, the aliens, the politics, the governments, everything that's within that world itself. It takes on a life of its own. Another good example is The Matrix. Could you imagine what it must have been like pitching the story of The Matrix to someone for the first time? And don't get me wrong, the characters are very important, but think about the world itself. How do you explain that? How do you explain something that's not in existence? You must sound like a crazy person. But then again, that is the job of an author we're supposed to come up with this crazy stuff. And another example of this is Game of Thrones. Personally, one of my favorite series out there. It's a world filled with magic and mysteries and so much rich lore in it. And it itself becomes one of the characters. So, in my story, Children of the Elements, A Kyndryl's Quest, sounds good, just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? In my story, the world is known as Alduna. Let me put that up. Alduna. Creating this world was challenging and just flat out fun. I've enjoyed it. And the characters, they're affected by this world. For my beta readers and anyone who has read the first chapter of my story, you already know how interesting this world is. Creating different creatures, different monsters, magic, the governments within it, the politics, the different kingdoms. It's a blast, and it takes its own form. It goes past world building, and like I said in my previous videos, I'm very descriptive in my writing, so I really do take care in writing this world. I think about every little aspect of it. So in Children of the Elements, A Kyndryl's Quest, Chastity, she does go on the quest. That much I could say. But because of the events happening within the world itself, things change. And motives could possibly change. And viewpoints as well. And as I mentioned, I treat the world as its own character, so it's always changing and it's ever changing. Now, I don't want to go into spoilers for my own book, but when I was working on my story, I wrote about a cult, and I led myself down a deep rabbit hole, because at first it started as, what does this cult believe in? Simple enough question. And then it goes to, why do they believe in that? And then why is the world like that too? And you could see how this keeps going down, but it all ties back to the world. From the character motives to what's going on, the current war. Alduna is always changing, it's always evolving, there's always something going on. There are a lot of things I really want to say, but I can't give things away. World building is very important, and that's why I treat it as its own character. So there you have it. That's who I feel is the most important character in any story, is the world itself. That's right. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Who do you feel is the most important character? Do you feel it's the protagonist? Am I completely wrong? Is it the antagonist or the anti-hero? Let me know in the comments below, guys. And also, if you haven't already followed, subscribe to the video so you can see when I post something new. Like the video, let me know what you think. And if you haven't already, add me on Instagram. Say what's up, say you saw the video. Let's chat for a bit. Well, once again, guys, I've been Brandon Adams. I thank you so much for joining me in my video. I hope you all have a positive day, and peace.